What's up, y'all? Welcome into a History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers podcast from Grind City Media. We are here in the Built for Tough studio in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm Lang Whitaker. He's Russ Bankston, my buddy. We worked together for a long time with Slam. We've been friends forever. And Russ wrote a book, A History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers. That's out now. And we are working our way through this book. We are on chapter 6 for us, episode 6. And it's time we talk about Air. We had talked about, the last one was about the Adidas Top 10, and it was sort of a chance for Adidas to bring together this group of unheralded, under-the-radar guys and make them the signature guys. But this is really, Nike sort of ended up doing the same thing. But I think, to me, the story of this chapter, shoe time, was like, this is sort of a time where Nike went to being what it is now. To me, like, it's really transitional for Nike in a sense that it kind of put them at a different level.
Air did in general, and I feel like
because the shoe's the Air Force One. I forgot to say that. Yeah,
I feel like for this episode I should be wearing a Band-Aid on my face for Nelly.
Yeah.
Give
me two pair.
You know, Nike had Air basically brought to them as an idea by Frank Rudy, who was a former NASA engineer, like just this encapsulated Air. And a few years earlier, they put it in the Tailwind, which was their running shoe that had it. And there's a story that Phil Knight tells in his book, I think, about how, you know, it was basically brought to him as like an insole that he threw in his running shoes and ran, and was like, oh my God, like, you can tell.
By the way, that Phil Knight book is really entertaining to read.
Shoe Dog?
Yeah. But I also like how it's written almost like in his parlance. Like it's like it reads like he just like kind of was like laying in bed and he half like quoted it out to some person.
Which is entirely possible.
Maybe
I'm
so.
not sure.
Anyway.
I did not write this book that way.
Yeah.
But basketball is different. You know, basketball is like, okay, putting Air in a running shoe made sense because you're literally moving in a straight line for the most part. But basketball is like you're all over the place and it's cuts and it's, you know, start,
left, right.
Yeah. So it was a little bit of a more difficult proposition to put in there. So, you know, it took a little bit to get right. And, you know, Bruce Kilgore, who ended up being the designer on the shoe and is more of a industrial engineer, talked about like they had a basketball shoe before with Air, but it was really messy. I think you referred to it as poochy, the way the soles were like poking out. So like he structured these more.
Yeah.
And as you get this structured sole in this big space where they actually put Air on the side of the midsole just to break it up. Otherwise, you're dealing with this big space. You have to do kind of a tall upper too. They did do a low top, but you know, the upper's high. Like this is a big shoe.
This is actually one of Rasheed Wallace's game-worn shoes, or actually maybe he didn't wear these in a game, but this is one of the pairs.
They're made for him.
Nike made these for Rasheed Wallace, who wore Air Force Ones for most of his career, even into the 2000s when nobody else was wearing Air Force Ones. When Russ and I were at Slam, somebody at Nike who I was friends with, I wear the same size shoe as Rasheed Wallace, and they would, whenever they'd make a run of player shoes for Rasheed, they would slide one to me. So I have this pair. I have a pair of all blue. I have a pair of all red. I had a pair of black ones. The strap's missing on these. I took it off because like it just wasn't very practical to wear like around. But there is a strap that hangs down that you can wrap around the top of the original Air Force Ones. But this shoe is, I mean, it's so tall and it's heavy and it's big and I never really thought about it, but it feels like a hiking boot. And in the book, you talk about how like it was sort of based on a hiking boot.
They had shoes called the Approach and the Magma that were both like hiking boots in that era, and they did this sloping cut like front to back. If you look at most other basketball shoes from that era, it's straight across cut. Even what Nike was doing with the Blazer, with any sort of shoe before '82, but that sloping cut allowed you to like have that lace up high in the front, but then give the Achilles a little more freedom in the back. So, I mean, it didn't lighten those up much.
No.
But I picked up that shoe off the shelf and almost dropped it.
People like still had the idea, I think, that the taller a shoe is, the safer it is. And maybe not correct, but I think a lot of people are, and you know, people who play basketball, you think, oh, well, the bigger it is, the less chance it is I get hurt.
It's kind of the way, I think it's the way it feels. And I think there is a lot
You mean to wear? Like,
I think there's a lot of like, if you don't feel comfortable in a shoe or you feel like it's not going to protect you, like that's going to change the way you play.
Yeah.
And I think like it's important to feel like it's okay. You know, looking back at the way it started, like they built it as it was a primarily mesh shoe, and it had leather at the heel and at the toe and stuff. But they realized they wanted to sell this as like an $89 shoe, and it's like, okay, who's going to pay $89 for a mesh shoe, even if it has this new air technology in it? So it kind of became over time a more and more leather shoe.
Yeah.
The first version that, I don't know if Bobbito dubbed it the Air Force Zero or if that's kind of what it was before that, it didn't have perforations in the toe box, and the side panels were mesh. So that was the only place it would like breathe.
One thought I had when you were in the book, you talked about Frank Rudy, who was the designer or whatever he was,
Lord of Air.
Yeah, who brought it to Nike. He went to other companies first, apparently. Like, what if this ends up at Adidas? What if that air technology doesn't end up at Nike at all?
Right.
And look, Phil Knight was clearly an incredible businessman and marketer and all these different things. I'm sure they figure out something else to do it on, but it feels like just like such sort of kismet for Nike that it did end up there.
Yeah, and you do. I mean, I don't know. Like, there's all sorts of interesting paths it could have taken because one of the reasons, like, you know, and we'll get to this more, but like Michael Jordan really loved Adidas.
Yeah.
And part of the reason he liked Adidas was because the way they fit, and the shoe was kind of low to the ground.
Yeah.
Like when they ended up doing the first Air Jordan, they put a tiny airbag in it because they needed air to call it Air Jordan.
Yeah.
But it was just enough to have something. So maybe if Adidas takes air, maybe he's more prone to want to sign with Nike if Nike is the one doing lower profile shoes. You know, also like Nike had started what became Shox around the same time that Air happened. So maybe that project doesn't get shelved for so long. Maybe there's a mechanical cushioning system that comes out in the 80s instead of,
because when the
not till
Shox
2000.
did come out in the 2000s, it seemed so futuristic. Imagine if it had come out in the 80s. It would have been like the craziest thing ever.
It would have definitely thrown people, and I think he would have had to explain it more. I mean, that's the thing about Air is Air kind of, you don't have to know
it's self-explanatory,
Yeah, like, and Air obviously is some mixture of gases in a bag. Like, it's not just like literal air.
Yeah.
But still, like, it explains itself.
And I remember being a kid and like going to Foot Locker or whatever and seeing like these cutaways at the register that would show you what the airbag looked like, you know, before Air Max and those came out where you could actually see it. And you know, you would think, wow, there's this thing in the sole and it's going to help me run higher and run faster and jump higher and all those things. And it really worked. But the funny thing to me is when Nike puts this shoe out, like they got like Moses Malone was like one of their main guys, and like he couldn't even get off the ground. Like that was Moses, like he was just known for being a ground player, you know,
right? Who would like tap rebounds to himself,
pad his stats,
or at least wait until he could catch it, you know, like
he was on the Hawks when I was a kid, and I used to watch him play.
He was 100 years old when he was on the Hawks.
Well, he was 100. He looked 100 years old the whole time he played. But like, Moses would come out and. You know, like he was 6'10", 6'11", but I don't ever remember him dunking over
that
someone.
Knee brace is bigger than you. But like, I mean, he wore low tops early too. Like I mean, before they really became a retail thing, and like certainly well before Air Force One lows became like the staple for like streetwear.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was him and other guys.
Some of the other guys, like Daryl Griffith was a dunker, right?
Right.
Like, but he was like one of the Nike guys. Michael Cooper was known for playing above the rim.
And Coop was above the rim and defender, and like also wore very tall socks, as you can see.
Yeah.
In that, with Dr. J, what are you doing? Play defense.
Didn't he's the one who tomahawks on Michael Cooper later?
He does. He does. Or that might have been earlier
on the NBA Superstars video.
Oh, so bad. But you know, like it's funny. They tried to figure out like some of the guys like Coop and Michael Thompson. You know, tried to figure out like what separated those Air Force One guys, and like they were saying like being defensive players, and then they get to some of them, and they're like, wait a minute, no, that's not right.
I have there's an ad in the book. I'll hold it up.
The poster shoot.
that's sort of known as the
you'll get it there somewhere,
as the picture where they down there at the bottom.
Yeah, wearing these like kind of spacesuit sort of things that.
And apparently it didn't fit Moses Malone. They had to cut it on him.
Yeah, they did. Basically paper doll it over him, and you couldn't tell. But apparently they made fun of him for the rest of his life about it, basically.
I remember that poster and like that, when they rebooted the Air Force One, whenever that was, 10 years ago, what was that, 15 years ago? Remember when they redid the 25th anniversary or whatever?
Anniversaries of it.
And they redid the poster and had like Kevin Durant.
Yeah, 25th anniversary was like 2007.
Yeah.
They did 35th, and it was just 40th. But I was going to say, you had different guys wearing it too. You had Danny Ainge wearing like green Air Force Ones, It's like they were doing different shoes for different guys. Barkley wore them, I think, early on. What's his name? They had college programs wearing it. So, it kind of became pretty ubiquitous.
What was this shoe's competition at the time?
It was so different. It was so tall, and it was so big, and like I guess cushioning.
The top 10 was still out then?
The top 10, that's the thing. There was like kind of interesting overlap. Like, George Gervin was kind of the face of the Nike Blazer. And I think it was there was kind of that same thing with Nike as there was with Adidas, where it's like, if you wore Blazers and if you wore this like vulcanized leather low top that was lighter and lower to the ground, and like all of a sudden you get this. And it's like, man, that's just such a big change. And Gervin did end up wearing it towards the end of his career with the Bulls, actually, his last season. You had some guys transitioning to it, but it was a larger than life shoe. It's like, and it didn't require much explanation. Like you would look at it and it's like, damn, that big lettering, and it was just massive.
And it fit the game of Rasheed Wallace so well. Like you have a page in the book about Rasheed, who grew up in Philadelphia and ends up in Portland, where Nike was headquartered, and then ends up bouncing around in Detroit and all these other places at the end of his career. But like the whole world evolved except for Rasheed, who continued to wear Air Force Ones.
Yeah,
into the 2000s.
And Rasheed like said his older brother got a pair, and like because they just call them Airs basically, and like. His brother got him, so he wanted a pair, so he got him when he was a kid. And it's like, Rasheed being a kid, you're getting them like even after they had already been a performance shoe. Like this is before he went to Carolina, which would have been in the early 90s, and then plays for the Bullets. Yeah. He did wear some modern shoes with the Bullets, but I think realized like, no, like this is what I'm comfortable in. Yeah. And comfortable from a physical standpoint and from a, what do you call it, just a mental standpoint. Yeah. Like he liked the high top and lacing it up, even though he wore the straps off the back.
Yeah, the strap hung
for
on
the
the
most
back.
part. I think some of his maybe had like a leather strap, and then like you can't rock it off the back. But
you mentioned these being performance shoes and stuff, and it's interesting to me that now this shoe is still around. If I go to the Nike employee store here in Memphis, there's a whole aisle of Air Force Ones, usually low tops. But now it's almost strictly a fashion shoe.
Yeah, and they've released thousands of them.
Millions.
And like
actually, for my birthday this year, my wife ordered a pair of low-top Air Force Ones and had my son decorate them and like paint on them and draw pictures and all this stuff. And I'm saving them to wear during the season. But like they are like sort of the genius of this shoe, and I don't think it was designed this way, but it turned out to be this way, is that it's so customizable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, just panels.
Every little bit you can,
And I think that was kind of like where Nike was headed with that. Like they didn't even, the Air Force One didn't get them there, but once they got there, the Air Force One kind of retroactively became that. Once they did the Dunk, the Air Jordan 1, the Terminator, like you had all these different shoes that like really used color and materials. And Sheeds were a perfect example of that. I mean, there was one, I forget what All-Star game he wore it at, but it had like ostrich, like all these weird like combinations that were more like, you'd see them more on like a streetwear version of it. Yeah. But Rasheed actually sort of flipped it all and made it back into a performance shoe. Yeah. You know, people always said like, "Oh, his must be completely custom made with something different in them."
Yeah,
but they weren't. I mean, that's what he ever said.
They are 100% retail.
And he had orthotics. He would wear orthotics.
Yeah, like I mean, the ones I would get, like this one, would have sample printed in the sole of it. But
right.
It was just like a shoe that, you know, they would just make Air Force Ones and just put his little logo on the bottom of it and send them out.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me that this shoe still exists. Is still for sale. They're still cranking them out. You know, maybe not for the reason they intended, but like this shoe to me, as much as, you know, we talked about, we'll get to the Air Jordan 1 and how much that sort of changed this world and everything. But to me, like this one for Nike, like you can't understate how important it was.
And it's interesting to me that like the name Air Force One came from the president's jet. Like it came from Air Force One.
Yeah.
Not like it wasn't intended to be the Nike Air Force #1. Like it wasn't going to be like immediately Air Force 2, Air Force 3.
Shoes,
It was just Air Force One, full name. And it was taken off the market. Like in 1984, they took it off the market and did the Airship as kind of the sequel to it, which was a similar height, no strap, similarly thick sole, but with like more of a, I don't even know what you'd call it, but an open space under the heel, like to sort of allow for even more cushioning. But there was such a clamor, primarily in Baltimore, to bring it back. And they did. Like 2 years, in 1986, they started making it again. So it really never went off the market because you could still find them for years after 84, like even in New York.
Uptowns, right?
But it became this like I-95 corridor shoe.
Yeah.
And I mean, it just never disappeared.
I don't think it ever will.
No.
I mean, even when they tried to, you know, do the 25th anniversary of it, like those are gone. No one sees those anymore. This one's still around.
Right.
So
Anyway,
these are awesome shoes and one of my favorite Nikes of all time. And gonna lead us now past this early 80s into sort of the mid 80s and get closer to the time where we actually remember these things and were around and saw these things. I guess the one way I would sum up this shoe to me is ball don't lie. Shout out Rasheed. That's Russ. I'm Lang. You're watching a History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers podcast, or listening to us here on Grind City Media. We'll be back soon for chapter 7. See you soon.
Both teams played hard.
If you're looking for even more sneaker culture content, check out The Sneak Fest Show with me, Kelsey Ray Johnson, Sherman, Adam, and Jerry, live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. on Grind City Media YouTube and the brand new Grind City Media app.